Most definitions of dyslexia are overwhelming, packed with confusing terms, and don't really help parents understand what's going on in their child's head. I want to teach you what's going on in your child's head based on the 3.5 decades I've spent teaching dyslexics to read. Without using a bunch of confusing professional language, dyslexia means a child's brain has difficulty matching the sounds in words with the letters that represent those sounds. This is the phonological awareness you may have heard so much about. Quite simply, these little squiggly lines we call letters don't match up to sounds for them. It's difficult for them to process the letters into sounds. That's dyslexia in a nutshell. Let's look at some reasons why dyslexics struggle to read. Brain images show underactivation, less activity in Broca's area of the brain when dyslexics are reading or trying to sound out words. This means it's harder for dyslexics to translate written symbols into sounds, and that's a key step for reading. They're just wired different. They're not lazy, and they're not trying to make your head explode. It's hard for them. The Broca's area is a region in the left frontal lobe of the brain that plays a crucial role in learning to read by helping children decode sounds and articulate words. And because it's not firing as strongly and not as active, dyslexics use the right brain more to learn to read. And it's kind of a more laborious process to learn to read that way. It's not that your child's unintelligent. They're just wired a little different. Your child is trying, they're just struggling to process print into sound. That's why they need to be taught differently, and that's why in my program, I don't teach reading the way schools teach reading. Dyslexic kids tend to be right side dominant. The right side of the brain is great at creativity, visual thinking, seeing the big picture. That's why they build great Lego structures, dance, imaginary worlds that they describe to you from the backseat of the minivan as you're driving. That's what they're so good at. And for some of you, it's so painful to watch them be so good at that and struggle to learn to read. But there are ways to work around this. And while this right side dominance makes learning to read harder, right brain dominant kids are creative. They're innovators. They see things differently. They come up with imaginary worlds. They take apart the Lego kit you bought them and spent that money for, and they build their own creation that's cooler. They're innovative and creative because they see the world differently. They literally process the world around them differently. I made a video about the connection between dyslexia and creativity that will inspire your child. You'll find a link to it in the descriptions below. Dyslexia can also have a visual processing component. The eyes work. The kids always pass the vision test, right? But the part of the brain that processes what they're seeing works differently. This is why saw becomes was, and the is he, and who is how. So what happens is the part of the brain that processes wants to manipulate in 3 dimensions. But writing's 2 dimensions. So D's become B's, P's become Q's. Research shows that up to 70% of children that have dyslexia have a visual processing disorder component to their challenges. There are people that say that this doesn't exist. I can tell you, as a dyslexic, it does. I stayed back in 3rd grade because I couldn't read. And I can remember crying and fighting with my mom. I literally said, they're little black marks because I couldn't discern an F from a T, a P from a Q, a D from a B. And hop and hope look the same. So what happens is they're trying to process what they're seeing as well as trying to understand the phonological relationships. Is your child struggling to visually process what they see? Do they invert letters, flip words, look at words that have similar letters like who, change the order, say how? Do they skip whole words and keep going? Do they skip whole lines because they're visually trying to process and track? In my program, I teach parents to deal with these processing challenges by using multi-sensory instruction. I have a video on it below called The Power of Touch. There's really 2 videos I want you to see. How dyslexics see words and what to do about them, and The Power of Touch. Both videos are in descriptions below and will help you overcome the phonological challenges as well as the visual processing challenges. It amazes me that there's still a debate about this. The children have a hard time processing what they're seeing. So imagine how difficult it is to read if they're looking at who and they're trying to figure out the phonological relationships between the mark, but who is actually how. They're seeing how. And you're like, Keith, how could that be? Believe me, I've been through it, and that's what may be happening. But wait, there's more. We're going to talk about the third component that may be present in your child: auditory processing challenges or auditory processing disorder. Now, auditory processing disorder is a separate diagnosis from dyslexia. And the whole world out there has gotten so specialized. I'm like, look, these kids just can't read. We got to help them. Research shows that up to 70% of dyslexia children have an underlying auditory processing disorder. This means a significant portion of children that have been diagnosed with dyslexia experience difficulty in how their brain processes sounds, which of course is going to impact with how they engage with phonics. I have this too. I've got it all. Basically, I've got the whole alphabet of whatever you can come up with, man. And I'm a functioning adult and award-winning teacher. But if I'm in a crowded room and someone calls out Pete, I will answer to it because it sounds like Keith. So how this interacts with phonics and dyslexia is let's say your child's just missed a word and the word is pit and he says hit. So you say, hey buddy, it's pit. And he says hit again because when you said pit, he heard hit. So that's kind of how auditory processing works. I can't tell you how often they checked my ears when I was a kid. And my ears worked. But back then they weren't as good as figuring out that I wasn't actually hearing the proper sounds. I have a whole video on how to work with children that have this APD component of dyslexia, and you'll find a link in the descriptions below. So let's look at the world they live in. The little genius kid world they live in. They're so gifted and talented at so many things. But these three things, right? The phonological challenges and phonological awareness, the visual processing challenges, and the auditory processing challenges that can be combined, not always, but sometimes all three exist within one child. All three of these things can work together within dyslexia to make learning to read incredibly hard, unless teachers and parents take into account these components of dyslexia, change the way they teach, and use multisensory instruction. Then that dyslexic child will read fluently and at high comprehension levels. I've seen it happen over and over again. They learn differently, therefore they must be taught differently. You'll find links to these other more in-depth videos in descriptions. You'll also find a link to my course. If you can give my online course 15 minutes a day, we can get your dyslexic child to grade level. Please subscribe. I've got a lot more coming out. And remember, your little creative genius learns differently and processes the world around them differently. Therefore, they need to be taught differently.